What happens when a wife laughs off the wrong moment, humiliates her husband in front of friends, and thinks silence means forgiveness, only to discover he's already building his case piece by piece? My name is Sabrina Lane, and I used to think attention was harmless as long as people laughed. That night at the sports bar, I smiled when Tyler slapped my thigh after our team scored, rolled my eyes like it was no big deal, like it was part of the celebration, like it wasn't happening right in front of Daniel while everyone around the table watched to see his reaction. He didn't react at all. He kept his eyes on the TV, sipping his drink slowly, face calm like nothing touched him, while I joked that some people didn't know how to have fun. People laugh the way they do when they're waiting for someone else to speak, but Daniel didn't give them anything. He paid the bill at the end of the night, helped Ella with her jacket, told Max to grab his backpack from under the table, and drove us home in silence, while I told myself he was sulking because he hated looking uptight in front of his friends. I didn't know he stopped on the way back to pick up security footage from the bar, that he texted his lawyer the same night, that he was already moving money out of the joint account before I even fell asleep. The night at the sports bar started out the same as any other, with too many people crammed around the table, baskets of fries going cold while everyone argued about players and scores, laughter spilling over the music from the overhead speakers. Daniel sat beside me with his usual calm face, the one people joked belonged to a man who never lost his temper because he never raised his voice. Tyler sat on my other side, loud and joking as always, already a couple of drinks in, the kind of guy who thought teasing was flirting, and flirting was harmless because everyone laughed when he did it. When our team scored halfway through the second quarter, Tyler slapped my thigh under the table like it was part of the celebration, like it was nothing, like Daniel wasn't sitting right there watching the whole thing. I smiled. That was all. Smiled, rolled my eyes, told him to knock it off with that half-laughing tone people use when they want to be heard, but not taken seriously. Daniel didn't say a word, didn't look at me, didn't look at Tyler either. He just reached for his drink, eyes on the screen overhead, expression steady like nothing happened, while the people around the table laughed a little too loud because they didn't know what else to do. Someone made a joke about Daniel needing to lighten up. Someone else muttered that Tyler was always like that after a few beers, and I said everyone was overreacting, that it was harmless fun, that people needed to stop acting like the sky was, falling over a friendly gesture. Daniel didn't argue. He didn't tell anyone to knock it off, didn't tell me it was disrespectful, didn't tell Tyler to watch himself. He ordered another round of drinks, asked Ella if she finished her burger, reminded Max to grab extra napkins before the second half started. I told myself his silence meant he didn't care, that he was too serious for his own good, that men like him hated looking jealous because they thought it made them look weak. Tyler laughed at another joke I made about Daniel being married to spreadsheets more than to me, and I laughed along because it felt like winning when Daniel stayed quiet. When the game ended, Daniel paid the bill without saying anything, told the kids to get their jackets, walked us all to the car while I kept up the small talk with Tyler and the others, like nothing about tonight would last longer than the drive home. I climbed into the passenger seat expecting him to finally bring it up, to ask why I let Tyler talk to me like that, to give me the fight I knew was sitting under his calm face. But he only asked if the kids had homework when we got home because it was already late. Back at the house, Ella went straight to bed. Max too, after brushing his teeth and packing his backpack for school. I poured myself a drink in the kitchen, waiting for Daniel to bring it up now that the kids were asleep, to tell me I crossed a line so I could roll my eyes and say he was being dramatic. But he only went into the study, closing the door halfway, while the printer started humming a few minutes later, steady and mechanical, like it had a lot to get through. I leaned against the door frame, asking if bills were due already, if that was why he was digging through old files, but he said he was just keeping things organized before tax season, his voice even, polite, like nothing needed to sound like an argument tonight. I laughed and told him the IRS didn't need to know how many jokes I made at the sports bar, but he didn't laugh, didn't even look at me, just kept sliding papers into neat piles before tucking them into a folder he labeled with today's date. I told myself he was pouting, that this was his way of looking like the bigger person, that he'd stay quiet until I apologized first so he could act like forgiveness made him noble. Jess texted asking if Daniel was mad, sending laughing emojis when I said he hadn't said a word the whole night, telling me some men hated being teased because they had no idea how to laugh at themselves. I typed back that she was right, that Daniel would get over it the way he always did, that he was too obsessed with work and routines to actually stay mad over something this small. But when I passed the study again on my way upstairs, he was scanning pages into his laptop now, phone plugged in beside him like he was pulling data off it too, labeling folders with dates and names I couldn't read from the doorway. He didn't close the screen when I stopped to watch, didn't explain, didn't ask me to leave, just kept working like I wasn't there at all. I told myself it was bills, maybe bank statements, maybe something for work. I didn't ask why he needed the receipt from the sports bar folded on top of the printer, or why he set aside a page with Tyler's name highlighted near the top. When he finally came to bed, he didn't say goodnight, didn't look upset, didn't look anything at all. He set his alarm for the morning, rolled onto his side facing the window, and fell asleep before I could decide whether to be angry or relieved. I told myself silence meant surrender, that if he really cared, he would have said something by now, that men who planned to leave didn't do it with printers and folders and calendars full of dates I hadn't bothered asking about yet. The next few days passed quietly, but not in the way that felt peaceful. More like the kind of quiet that hums underneath everything when someone's waiting for the right moment to move. Daniel stuck to his routine so tightly it felt unnatural, like he was following a checklist instead of living in the same house as me. He woke early every morning, made pancakes for Ella and Max, packed their lunches with small notes tucked into each bag, then dropped them off at school before heading to work without ever asking if I needed a ride anywhere. He didn't mention the game, didn't mention Tyler, didn't mention how I laughed when everyone else at the table waited for his reaction. He didn't look at me differently either, but that calm face of his started to feel like something I couldn't read anymore. Jess told me over coffee that I should stop overthinking everything, that men like Daniel sulked before coming around because they hated looking jealous in front of people. I laughed and said he was too serious for his own good, that everyone blew the whole thing out of proportion, that Tyler was just being himself, and Daniel needed to get over it like an adult. Jess smirked and said maybe I should give him a few days before cracking another joke about him being married to his spreadsheets. But Daniel started spending more time in the study at night. The door stayed half closed, while the printer ran longer than usual, spitting out pages he stacked into neat piles, before sliding them into folders, with dates written across the top. I passed by one evening and saw our phone records open on the screen, my own name on half the call logs, because I never bothered deleting anything from the plan history. He didn't close the laptop when I walked in, didn't explain, just said he was staying organized in case things got misplaced later. I laughed and told him the IRS didn't care about my texts, but he didn't laugh, just kept stacking pages into a folder thicker than the one he labeled last week. On Thursday, my debit card got declined at the grocery store. The cashier gave me that polite little smile people use when they think you're embarrassed, and I used my credit card instead, pretending it was no big deal, even while my stomach twisted. In the car, I checked the account and saw money moved into a new one with Daniel's name only. When I called him, he said bills would be easier to handle from one place now, his voice calm like this was about convenience, instead of locking me out of the account we'd shared for nearly a decade. I told him he was being controlling, that this was ridiculous, that he was punishing me for something that wasn't even my fault. But he only said the mortgage cleared on time this month, before hanging up like the conversation was already finished. Jess said this was financial manipulation, that I should screenshot everything in case things got ugly. But even she sounded uncertain when I told her Daniel hadn't raised his voice once through any of it. He didn't fight, didn't accuse, didn't shout or slam a single door. He just kept printing things at night, moving money during the day, talking to the kids about homework and bedtime routines, like nothing was happening, while the drawer in the study filled with more labeled folders every evening. Sunday afternoon, Marilyn called saying Ella and Max were staying the night at her house because they wanted to bake cookies and see their cousins. Her tone was polite but final, like she wasn't really asking. I said they had school in the morning, but she only said Daniel would drop them off since he was staying there too for the night. When I asked him about it, he said the kids liked the bigger yard at his parents' house, that it was quieter there, that they slept better without staying up late while Jess and I watched movies in the living room. He didn't accuse me of anything, didn't sound angry, didn't even look at me when he packed their overnight bags like this was normal now. That evening, I passed the study and saw him scanning pages into digital folders on his laptop, the glow of the screen reflecting off his glasses while he typed labels with dates going back months. I asked why he needed both printed copies and digital ones, and he said backups were important in case things got misplaced. His voice even, almost casual, like this was about bills instead of whatever story he was building page by page. Monday, another envelope from the bank came with my name removed from the mortgage entirely. Daniel listed a loan where both our names had been for years. When I asked about it, he said it made paperwork simpler. He didn't argue when I called him controlling, didn't defend himself when I said this was petty revenge, didn't answer when I demanded to know why he needed 3 folders stacked on the desk now instead of 1. He just told Ella to get ready for her spelling test, reminded Max about his reading log, and left for work like nothing I said required any response at all. The weekend came with my father's birthday barbecue, one of those family events where kids ran through sprinklers in the yard. Aunts carried potato salad in glass bowls, and folding tables got set up under the trees with paper plates and plastic cups, lined in rows. Daniel helped my father move the grill closer to the shade, carried bags of ice for the coolers, set up chairs without waiting to be asked. He moved with that same steady calm he'd had all week, the kind that made me want to say something just to break it, to get some reaction proving he wasn't made of stone. Jess showed up late carrying a store-bought cake and grinned at me like she was waiting for me to do something memorable, the way she always did when there was an audience. Halfway through lunch, my brother started teasing Daniel about never posting photos online, about being too private, about looking like a man from another century, while everyone else shared their whole lives on social media. I laughed and said maybe he stayed off the internet because he didn't like competition, because if people saw how many friends I had texting me, they might wonder why my husband never looked jealous. Jess laughed first, then my cousin smirked, then someone muttered that I was terrible in that half-joking tone people use when they don't want to take sides yet. Daniel didn't respond. He handed Max a napkin, asked Ella if she wanted more lemonade, told my father the burgers were ready to flip. His calmness made my mother clear her throat like she wanted to change the subject but didn't know how, made Marilyn stare at me from across the table with a look sharp enough to cut through the noise. Jess nudged me under the table like I'd just scored a point in some invisible game. After cake, Daniel loaded Ella and Max into the car, thanked my parents for dinner, told everyone he'd drop the kids at his parents' house for the night since they wanted to see their cousins again. He left without saying a single word to me about anything I'd said at the table. Marilyn followed carrying the kids' backpacks, her mouth tight like she was holding back everything she wanted to say until there weren't witnesses. Jess rolled her eyes after they left, saying Daniel was trying to make me look like the bad guy by acting calm, by walking away instead of fighting, by leaving me there while everyone else cleaned up around me. I told her he hated attention, that he always wanted to look like the bigger person, that he thought silence made him superior somehow. My father muttered something about boundaries under his breath while carrying plates inside. My mother didn't say anything at all. That night I texted Daniel asking if he planned on ignoring me forever. He replied with Ella's spelling list for the week and Max's dentist appointment on Tuesday. No mention of the barbecue, no mention of what I said, no mention of me at all. Monday evening, my mother called saying Daniel had stopped by her house alone after work, sat at the kitchen table with both my parents, and showed them a few things they should probably see. She didn't explain what things, just said I might want to talk to him before next weekend. Her voice carried that edge she used when delivering bad news slowly, like unwrapping something sharp. That night, I checked the study while Daniel was in the shower. 4 folders now, thicker than before, labeled with dates in his neat handwriting. One open on the desk showed pages of call logs stapled to printed text messages, receipts taped beside them with yellow highlighter marks connecting dates across documents like he was building a timeline. I closed it carefully before he came out, heart pounding though I told myself it was just paper, nothing real, nothing that would matter if he ever tried to use it. Jess said he was bluffing, that men like him wanted control without confrontation, that he'd never risk humiliating himself in court over some texts and jokes. I told her she was right because I wanted to believe it, because Daniel still hadn't yelled or cursed or slammed a single door. He tucked the kids into bed every night, read Ella's spelling words with her, checked Max's math homework, folded laundry, paid bills, all with that same steady calm like the house wasn't slowly filling with paperwork I hadn't read yet. But Thursday afternoon, my father called saying Daniel asked for a family dinner Sunday evening because he had something important to share before filing paperwork next week. I demanded to know what paperwork, but my father just said I should be there, his voice heavy in a way that made my stomach twist even before I hung up. Jess told me to relax, that this was theater, that he wanted me nervous before forgiving me so he could look like the bigger person. I agreed out loud, but later that night, I watched him carry all 4 folders to his car, stacking them beside a neat black briefcase like someone preparing for a trip they weren't coming back from, moving with the kind of calm that didn't feel like bluffing at all. Sunday evening, I drove to my parents' house telling myself this was nothing, just Daniel being dramatic because he hated looking like the quiet one while I got all the laughs. Jess texted me before I left saying I should act calm no matter what, that men like him loved to think they were intimidating when really they just wanted attention. I wanted to believe her, but my hand stayed tight on the wheel the whole drive because Daniel had been too quiet lately, because he loaded those folders into his car like someone getting ready for a storm no one else could see yet. When I walked in, my parents were already at the table, my mother with her hands folded like she was waiting for church to start, my father with his reading glasses set beside a stack of plates, Daniel at the end of the table with those same folders, stacked neatly in front of him. Ella and Max were on the floor near Marilyn with crayons and coloring books, their little backpacks leaning against her chair like they already lived somewhere else. Daniel didn't stand when I came in, didn't smile, didn't look angry either, just nodded toward the chair across from him like this was a meeting instead of dinner. He started laying out pages one by one, sliding them across the table toward my parents. At first I thought it was bank stuff, maybe bills or mortgage statements, but then I saw my own name on the first page, a list of calls with dates and times printed in black lines that went back months. My mother leaned forward slowly, reading the first few entries without speaking, while my father picked up the second page, showing text messages, printed in neat rows between me and Jess, about nights I called work trips, about weekends I said were for, conferences, about jokes I made thinking no one would ever see them outside my phone. I told Daniel he was twisting everything, that people exaggerated over text, that jokes didn't mean anything when you pulled them out of context. He didn't respond, just laid down the next set of pages showing bank charges highlighted in yellow, dates circled to match the calls and texts, the neat little lines connecting receipts to times like he was building some case for a crime that didn't exist. My father flipped through pages slower now, his mouth tight, while my mother kept reading without looking at me once. Jess wasn't here to smirk or whisper that he was bluffing, that this was all for show, that no one would take this seriously. It didn't feel like bluffing anymore when Daniel added school attendance records next, each signed by him or Marilyn, each showing Ella and Max present every day since spring, notes in the margins from teachers about assignments turned in on time, about conferences attended by Daniel alone. I said this was revenge, that he was humiliating me on purpose because I embarrassed him first, that this wasn't about kids or school or money, just about pride. My mother finally looked at me then, her face tight in a way that made my stomach twist harder than if she'd yelled. Daniel kept going, page after page. Pediatrician visits, after-school schedules, calendars marked with pickup times and dentist appointments. Every page lined up into a story he never said out loud, but didn't have to because it was all there in black ink. Then he slid the last document forward, a custody and property petition already signed by him, already dated for filing first thing Monday morning. My father read the first paragraph twice before folding his hands on the table, staring at the stack like it weighed more than paper. I told Daniel this was petty, that real men didn't ambush their wives in front of family, that he was turning our marriage into some courtroom drama instead of talking like adults. He didn't respond, didn't defend himself, didn't even look at me, just gathered the unused pages back into the folder, stacked everything neatly, closed the cover with slow, careful movements, like someone done building whatever they came to build. When it was over, he told Ella and Max to get their shoes, thanked my parents for dinner, like this was any other Sunday evening, and walked out with the folders under his arm, while Marilyn followed, carrying Ella's jacket without glancing my way. My mother started stacking the pages left on the table, but didn't hand them to me, didn't ask my side of the story, didn't say anything at all. My father just sat there staring at the closed door, like he'd been expecting it to shut for a long time before it finally did. The courthouse felt colder than it looked from the outside, the kind of cold that wasn't about temperature, but about walls and ceilings that didn't care what brought you here. Daniel was already at the table with his lawyer when I walked in. The same folders stacked neatly in front of him, like soldiers lined up for inspection. He didn't look at me, didn't nod or speak, just leaned toward his lawyer while she organized papers into smaller piles, with colored tabs sticking out like she'd spent hours preparing them in the exact order the judge would want. My parents sat behind me on the wooden bench, my mother holding her purse tight in her lap, my father staring straight ahead with the same set jaw he had at the dining room table last Sunday. When the judge entered, Daniel's lawyer started first, sliding copies of documents across the table one at a time, each page landing soft but heavy enough that the sound of paper on wood felt louder than it should have. Call logs came first, months of dates and times printed in black lines, with highlighted entries marking late-night calls, weekend calls, calls that matched every date on the pages that followed. The judge flipped through them slowly, nodding once before setting them aside like they were only the beginning. Text messages came next, printed in neat rows between me and Jess, between me and people whose names I didn't want to hear out loud in this room. Jokes I made, comments I thought disappeared when I deleted them, words pulled out of my phone and lined up here, like evidence in a trial I didn't know I was in until now. I said they were harmless, that people exaggerated over text all the time, that you couldn't read tone on a printed page, but the lawyer kept sliding more forward without looking at me once. Then came the receipts, hotel charges, restaurant bills, rideshare payments, all circled in yellow to match the dates on the calls and texts, like someone had spent months connecting every dot I thought was scattered too far to trace. My father shifted on the bench behind me but didn't speak. My mother stayed very still, her eyes on the stack building taller in front of the judge. Daniel didn't look at me while any of it was read aloud, not when the school records came next showing attendance signed by him and Marilyn, not when pediatrician visits and dentist appointments were listed on calendars, marked with his handwriting, not when teacher notes mentioned improved homework completion, since the kid started spending weeknights at his parents' house instead of ours. Each page landed quietly but hit harder than shouting would have. Harder than any fight we never had in the weeks leading up to this moment. Marilyn testified next, her voice steady as she answered questions about school pickups, about bedtimes and homework, about Clara's spelling tests, and Max's dentist appointments. She didn't look at me while she spoke, didn't raise her voice, didn't add anything beyond what was asked. Just facts, dates, times, witness to routines that made me sound like someone who lived in a different house entirely while all of this was happening. When it was my turn, I said this was revenge, that Daniel was twisting everything to look like the perfect father, the perfect victim, the perfect man holding his family together while I looked careless on paper because he picked every page to tell. Only his side. I said marriages weren't supposed to survive this kind of public dissection, that he was humiliating me in front of everyone to punish me for embarrassing him first. The judge listened but didn't look at me, didn't ask questions, didn't interrupt when Daniel's lawyer handed over one last page. a screenshot from a message I sent Jess after the barbecue, saying Daniel would never leave because men like him hated, losing more than they hated betrayal. The judge read it, set it on top of the stack, and started signing the temporary orders, waiting underneath, like my words had already been weighed and measured before I walked into the room. Custody to Daniel until the final hearing. Control of joint accounts to him for all household expenses until the divorce was finalized. The house remaining in his name for the children's stability. Child support calculations to be submitted next week based on income records already filed. Each order signed while I stood there saying this was too far, that he was destroying our family on paper to make himself look like the hero, that none of this proved what kind of mother I was. Daniel didn't react to anything I said. He didn't look at me when it ended, didn't speak to me, didn't even pause while stacking the folders back into his briefcase with that same steady calm he carried through the entire hearing. He thanked his lawyer, nodded to the judge, and walked out with Marilyn waiting in the hallway, while my parents stayed on the bench behind me, like they weren't sure whether to follow him or stay with me until the room emptied out completely. The final hearing felt nothing like the first one. No slow build-up this time, no sense that anyone in the room expected things to change just because 2 more weeks had passed. Daniel walked in carrying the same briefcase, the same folders stacked in the same neat order, like every page inside already knew where it belonged. He didn't look at me when I sat down across from him, didn't glance back at my parents behind me on the bench, didn't even seem to notice Marilyn coming in with Ella and Max, holding her hands as if this was just another school drop-off instead of the day everything permanent got decided. The judge started reading through the file before anyone said a word, flipping pages Daniel's lawyer handed over in the same order I had already seen: call logs, text messages, receipts, school records, witness statements, all the things I called petty and dramatic the first time, now treated like facts no one was bothering to argue about anymore. Daniel didn't speak once. He didn't need to. His lawyer answered questions about income records, about property values, about the children's schedules, pointing to pages already stamped and signed by teachers, doctors, and accountants who hadn't even been in the room, but whose words sat there, on official letterheads, like bricks stacked into walls I couldn't climb over. My own lawyer kept asking about context, about tone in the text messages, about whether hotel receipts proved anything beyond bad timing. But the judge didn't look interested in what things meant when the dates all lined up neatly across columns, highlighted in yellow ink. Marilyn sat with the kids behind Daniel, her arm around Ella's shoulders, while Max leaned against her side, swinging his feet, the two of them quiet like they had been here before and already knew how this ended. My parents sat behind me, my mother clutching a tissue she hadn't used yet, my father staring straight ahead with the same tight jaw he wore when Daniel first laid everything out on their dining table 2 weeks ago. Jess didn't come at all. She stopped answering my calls after Daniel's lawyer filed the pages with her name printed across the top of half of them. When the judge started reading the orders aloud, it sounded like someone closing doors one at a time while I stood in the hallway holding nothing. Full custody to Daniel for both Ella and Max, with visitation schedules matching the school calendar already submitted. The house awarded to Daniel for the children's stability. Joint accounts divided with remaining balances under his control until every shared debt was cleared. Retirement funds split by the percentages Daniel's lawyer filed weeks ago, while I was still telling Jess this was all bluffing. Child support amounts calculated against my income records, already pulled from tax filings Daniel attached to the stack I hadn't bothered reading before today. I said it wasn't fair, that he was making himself look like the perfect father while turning me into a headline printed across spreadsheets and receipts, that none of this showed what kind of mother I was, or how much the kids still needed me. The judge didn't answer. He didn't even pause while signing each page with the same steady hand, sliding one order aside before pulling the next one forward, like this was paperwork for strangers instead of the only life I had left. When it ended, Daniel signed everything without hesitation, stacked the folders back into his briefcase, nodded to his lawyer, and walked out with Ella and Max, holding his hands before I even stood from my chair. Marilyn carried Ella's jacket, Max's backpack slung over her arm, the three of them leaving together, while I stood there waiting for someone to say this wasn't final yet, that there was still something left for me to explain. My parents walked out behind me but didn't speak. My mother touched my shoulder like she wanted to say something before thinking better of it. My father unlocked the car without looking at me. I drove myself home alone, expecting Daniel to be there so we could finally talk. Now that the papers were signed, like maybe there was something left between the lines he hadn't closed off completely. But when I pulled into the driveway, the curtains were open, lights on in the living room, everything looking almost the same except for the silence. I walked up with my keys in hand, tried the lock, felt it catch halfway before realizing he had changed it already. My own house turning me back onto the porch, while my suitcase sat against the railing, where someone had left it, after packing everything I owned into 3 zipped bags I hadn't touched yet. The light stayed on behind the curtains, while cars passed on the street, like this was any other night, like nothing here mattered to anyone except me, standing outside a house that wasn't mine anymore, holding keys that didn't fit, staring at windows, glowing warm while the lock under my hand refused to turn even once. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.